Michael Steele, I'm coming straight for you. That was that could have been the substance of a convention speech. I mean, elections matter. Facts matter. Lives are on the line. I mean, that seems to be the right thing to say and the right way to win and defeat Donald Trump.
Well, not to take away from the seriousness of the moment we're in, obviously, with the coronavirus and the deaths and the concerns Americans have. We also have at the same time a presidential campaign, which is now full-throatedly going on. This is game on.
Yeah.
And this is a turning point because I've sensed for a while, at least from the various folks I've talked to on the Democratic side, and even a couple of Republicans, that President Obama has been wanting to get into this thing for a while. And he's got a lot he wants to say, not just on behalf of Joe Biden, but I think on behalf of the presidency as a whole, which will be a very interesting position for him to take, I think. And so this was a clear shot out the gate. He's ready. He's engaged. I think it lifts Joe. It positions Joe's voice now as the voice of opposition to the handling of this epidemic by the administration and to the concerns that a lot of Americans have about what they see and hear on a daily basis for at least 2 hours from the current commander-in-chief.
Claire McCaskill, President Obama and Michelle Obama are two of the most respected figures the world over. But perhaps their influence with one Bernie Sanders is one of the greatest displays of sort of quiet influence in our modern political moment. It's no small thing that Bernie Sanders is out and this Democratic primary contest is over, is it?
It's been a remarkable week. We have been distracted by the antics and the lack of leadership in the Oval Office, or as you like to say, the office without corners. But it has been remarkable, first, that Bernie got out. Secondly, that there was clearly affection and friendship between Bernie and Biden when Bernie announced his endorsement, and then following up today with a remarkable video that is such a contrast to what everyone saw, the caterwauling that everyone saw from the podium in the White House briefing room just yesterday evening. So, and I do think that Barack Obama was really smart about this. He knew that Biden needed to do this on his own, and Biden wanted to do it on his own, and he did. The voters decided. But through the whole process, Barack Obama kept the lines of communication open, not just with Joe Biden, but with the other candidates, and importantly, in recent weeks, with Bernie Sanders. And he listened to Bernie. He didn't call Bernie to tell him what to do. He didn't call Bernie to say, get out. He listened, and he wanted to make sure, I believe, that Bernie understood that he was an important part of his team and that he needed to be on this team and that his country needed him to be a real participant in this team. And I think that's what Barack Obama did in this election, is that he softened the edges so the end was not painful.
Michael Steele, Donald Trump has been tweeting a lot of clear agitation at Fox News. And to me, that's a canary in the mine kind of indicator. When he's mad at Fox, they're doing a little bit too much. The truth is too overwhelming, even for Fox to blot it out completely. Right. Where do you think Trump's conduct and the increasing exposure of his conduct, even among his base, stands right now? Is it a liability? Is it sort of a yellow flag? Is it anything flashing red for you? Where do you think his political standing is right now?
Yesterday was flashing red. What we saw yesterday was a moment that it was unprecedented. And, Paula Reed, you go, girl. I mean, just the doggedness of saying, making it very clear, you're not going to deflect backwards. I'm talking about a specific point in time where your administration has a gap. Can you explain that? That level of forcefulness clearly gets to the president in a way that nothing else does. And the more the press is doing that honestly and not falling into the little traps, the little rabbit holes that he creates, the much more difficult, I believe, this will be for the administration to continue to spin out of it. So right now, you're pretty much, when you look at the overall architecture of what we've seen over the last 2 weeks with these, what I call coronavirus press rallies, is yellow flags, little warning signs going off here and there. But yesterday, you actually got to see the red flag raised because of the way the president performed.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.